So I saw a post by Taiwanese Tofu asking if we've been pronouncing the Darce choke wrong this whole time. And this has a pretty big origination story. The last time I tried to go ahead and type this up on one of the forums, I got a few phone calls back and forth from a couple of the principal parties that wanted to clarify a few things. So I figured this would be a good opportunity to go ahead and talk about the Darce choke yet again. Now, the originations of the Darce choke generally come from two places. Both of them actually from the Renzo Gracie Academy. A lot of people will go ahead and are correctly attribute it to John Danaher. Danaher Death Squad, of course, as being one of the originations of the choke. But Renzo Gracie himself has mentioned that they played around with that variation dating back to the Pride days. When knees were legal, people would go ahead and in the turtle position cover up their head and face, and they needed some way to go ahead and go after them because guillotine chokes weren't a great option at that point, but the Darce choke became available to them. At any rate, the origination of the Darce choke comes from a gentleman by the name of Joe Darce, who also happens to be a Renzo Gracie black belt. Joe Darce is very quick to point out that he's not the one that originated the Darce choke. He actually gives credit to John Danaher. I've rolled with Joe Darce a number of times before, and aside from having a mean Darce choke, he actually has a hell of a cross-collar choke, which he should be known for as well. At any rate, at some point, Joe Darce was training in Las Vegas at Cobra Kai, and actually we have to take the story back a couple of notches right now. Okay, again, being that as I'm old as I am and I've been involved in jiu-jitsu as long as I have, when I started off, the new move that everybody wanted to know was something known as the half guard. Okay, which seems to be mind-blowing that it's part of the fundamental staple right now, but believe it or not, back in the late 90s, that was the exotic move that everybody wanted to know. You can trace the half guard origins back to either Gordo, Roberto Correa, or John Malao. Okay, but Gordo tends to get a little bit more credit for the use of the half guard. And not only did he have the half guard, he had a move from the half guard known as the old school sweep. We would reach around the back of your opponent, grab the far leg, pull it in, and use that to come up on top. Now, that was actually a very effective movement for a number of people for years. And it was the big secret technique that everybody wanted to know. Unfortunately, the way you do the old school sweep also sets you up really well for the Darce choke. Now, cue to a few years later, whereas the Renzo Gracie Academy on the East Coast, they started developing the Darce choke, which is actually known as the Bravo choke down in Brazil, which is a different story. Joe Darce was training over at Cobra Kai, Mark Lehman's school, which at the time was one of the meccas, probably the mecca for training in Vegas. Not only did you have a lot of jiu-jitsu folks that trained there, but a lot of MMA folks that were interested in training jiu-jitsu would be training in that. I've been in that room and you've seen guys of the generation of Tito Ortiz, Chuck Liddell, Rico Rodriguez, Marvin Eastman, Phil Baroni, plenty of other MMA fighters came out of that gym or trained at that gym at some point. At any rate, Mark Lehman and his crew were always up on the latest techniques and doing what they wanted to do, and they were certainly aware of what the old school sweep was. So they came in, practiced that, did that to a bunch of people. Joe Darce comes in and essentially murders everybody in there with the Darce choke. Like, you know, people would go in for that old school sweep. Joe Darce would set up for that old school for the Darce choke, and nobody knew what had hit him at that point. But of course, Joe Darce is a generous guy. He shared his knowledge with them, and in honor, as Mark Lehman put it, Darce choke doesn't quite roll off the tongue. So if you look at the spelling of Joe Darce, they just shorten it out to Darce choke. Now you have to know there's a pretty specific reason why coaches will give certain moves, even if they already had names. Darce choke, I'm sure, has like a proper Japanese name that John Danaher could tell you, but I can't. But there's a reason why coaches will kind of put their own spin and give their own names. It doesn't have to do with ego. It has to do with coaching. So if you give something a code name and you're coaching out to one of your students in a competition, and of course everything that you yell is heard by not only your student, but the competitor, the other coaches, the spectators, or whatnot, if you can call out something in code, it's more likely that your opponent's not going to be able to pick up on them. The coaches are going to make the adjustment on that. The originations of a lot of the 10th planet names, Bong, Wizard, Voodoo, whatever they call it on that. I know the names, just kidding. Are a lot of times set up designed to confuse your competitors in competition. So the Darce choke was something out that they could call out that their competitor would have no idea what was going on until it was too late, especially if they came up from the generation that you thought the old school sweep was the move to do. And Gordo himself has said that the old school sweep is dead thanks to the Darce choke. Fast forward a few years later, Darce choke becomes a bit more mainstream, but a name isn't going to be mainstream until it enters the consciousness, until it goes into Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan is probably the most powerful person in jiu-jitsu. Simply put, if he calls something out in a UFC broadcast by a name that he wants to call out, that name is going to stick. And when he learned of the Darce choke, when other MMA fighters started using the Darce choke, if you remember the originations of it from the Renzo Gracie Academy at least, is they were planning on using that Darce choke in Pride. Hence, when it got to Joe Rogan, when Joe calls it out, that's pretty much the final word on that. Everybody's going to call it the Darce choke. So there you go. That's the originations of the move, the Darce choke, and why we pronounce it Darce, not Darce, and who may or may not have invented it or at least brought it to current consciousness. Thanks so much. If you like this answer, be sure to check out my YouTube channel. Like, subscribe, share. Helps me out a ton. I'm trying to post up a new piece of content at least every single weekday.